We have done a really good job of, thanks to Mr. John Warniak especially from SEMA, we've done a really good job of trying to integrate with SEMA sort of taking over PRI here, to integrate our show with the folks from SEMA and get a lot of cross synergies going. I really encourage you guys, if you head out to SEMA show, John puts on some wonderful seminars that have the who's who of the industry, and does such a wonderful job, and he'll be joining us later on. The other thing I want to encourage all of our presenters that are sitting out in the audience that are here for the whole show is, even though we're relying on your expertise later on in the show, please feel free to ask questions throughout the day. That makes for a really good show. The other things that I will remind you here is some advice that my dad gave me. I've got my notepad and a pen because he said, always take notes because you won't remember a damn thing. So I encourage you to do that, and I also listen to my mom because I wore comfortable shoes today. So those two pieces of advice from my parents are going to be very important as the day wears on. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome from SEMA, Mr. Gavin Knapp, to the stage. SEMA Market Research is the go-to source for information on the $39 billion specialty automotive parts industry. And prior to SEMA, Gavin worked in both large and boutique market research firms, focused on helping firms better understand their customers. And Gavin, you have a wonderful presentation for us today as well.
Yes, I do. Let me kick this off over here. So if you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes, I'm going to go through the story of how I got here. I am the Director of Market Research for SEMA. So even though SEMA, the organization, grew up out of the motorsports and performance industry, we're a little different than you guys, right? Our focus is on the parts, right? It's often said it's not the things you need, it's the things you want. Although the racers out here would probably say if it makes me go faster, I really need it. Okay, so in that vein, I'm going to go through a little bit about where I came from and a little bit about, as it says here, a sneak peek into something that I'm working on that does cross over with you guys. So I head up market research for SEMA. I'm all about information. That's my job, okay? So I go through and I look at this parts industry, this performance accessory industry. It's a $39 billion industry. We estimate there's about 32 million households in the US that buy stuff from us, right? It's a very broad market. Goes from everything from camshafts to floor mats, okay? Most of that is not stuff you guys are really interested in, right? So a few years ago, when we were looking at partnering with PRI, we needed to look at the market. What's going on in racing? Well, here's what I had, okay? I had these legacy numbers that said, we sell $1.5 billion in racing parts, right? Just the parts, okay? And it kind of looked like this, okay? That's interesting information, not very detailed, not very descriptive, and knowing how specialized racing is, it's okay, but I'm not sure I'm fully bought into it, right? So we decided to look out there and try to find out what's going on in racing. How big is racing? Damn, that was tough, okay? I guess I can't blame people coming out of the recession, but every time we asked for a number, everything was pegged to 2007 numbers, okay? Nobody wanted to say what was going on in 2010 or 2011 at that point. So, as you know, we did partner with PRI Well, let me back up. So as we were looking at the market, we looked at outside research. And there's a lot of stuff out there on attendance, sponsorship, economic impact. Those are things that might be great for a lot of you guys, really help in the administration, but it doesn't help my guys figure out how many camshafts they're going to sell. Right? So this is what we found as we tried to explore this market and try to find out what was going on in it. So when we partnered with PRI, I took on some of their work. One of the things that I now work on is a survey of racing retailers. So that's the retail side of the business, retail parts, but also includes engine builders, things like that, since this is a specialized business. You can see over the last few years, we've seen pretty positive results. People have a pretty good outlook on the future, and saying that their business is at least doing well, if not increasing. If you read PRI Magazine, in the January issue, you will see updates of this, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff that comes out of that survey, talking about what that side of the business thinks is going on. But still, we had this basic question of how big is really the market? What's the opportunity for my guys, which is the people selling parts to racers? So we decided to go out and find out. So I went out and I hired a company to go out, amass a whole bunch of information, and figure out for me how many race cars are active out there in the market during a year. So they went through all of the race results that are published, they talked to people throughout the industry, and they amassed a report that I'm working on right now. We made a conscious decision to move away from what I showed you before, which is the $1.5 billion in part sales. What we decided to do is find the base measure that will help our guys, which is cars. If I make a part, it goes on a car. If I know how many cars are out there running around tracks, then I have a chance to figure out what my opportunity is, right? I know my business. I can figure out how often people are changing out my part, how often that people have the opportunity to purchase my part. But one of the things that was missing is knowing how many cars are actually out there in the market. And that's what we set out to do. So you'll see the caveats. This is autos only, or autos and light trucks, okay? No motorcycles, no carts, no others. It's also dedicated race cars, okay? So we didn't go out and count how many cars were going around in track days and things like that if they were on-road cars, okay? So now the sneak preview of this report that I'll have out by the end of the year, unfortunately I don't have it today. I'm really bummed about that. So they worked closely with Tim to figure out, okay, how many tracks are out there? Okay, how many tracks, what kind of tracks are out there? And the big reveal, about 200,000 active cars during a year. Okay, now is that every race car that exists? Definitely not. Okay, if it didn't run, we didn't get it, right? We didn't go and count every garage, every car that's in every garage. But utilizing the best we could do, that's how many cars were active during a year running races. So you can see it's kind of broken out between national and regional sanctioned. There's a lot of race series out there. I never knew that. You guys probably do. I didn't. A lot of races. So we've got sort of the national, and then we've got the local or the grassroots races. And it all adds up to about 200,000 active cars. And as it goes through the report that you guys will be able to see by the end of the year, and we break it out, you can see some things like drag are really kind of a balance between sort of those sanctioned regional and national races and local races. You see something like stock car, very much grassroots. There's a whole lot of grassroots in that area. That's as far as I'm going to get today, because this was just designed to give you a starter, give you a little sneak preview. But I hope that gives you an idea of what we're going to show. The report itself, rather than being these 2 pages, is going to be 100 pages of detail that goes through different car types, through different racing types, talks about regional differences, etc. So, what do you guys think? Does this resonate? Does it make sense? Is it in the ballpark?
I think it's all valuable information. At least for us operating the road circuit primarily, we don't host major races. We're obviously into recreation and motorsports. The track day customer is really our customer. The amount of racing we do compared to how many track days we do is pretty lopsided.
Right. Now, for my purposes, again, I'm somewhat different. We know a lot about cars on the street, right? And cars that are modifying for performance. What we didn't know was these dedicated cars. That was the area for my guys that was really missing. So that's what our focus was here. In terms of the performance guys who are out there for fun but using their street cars, contact me. I'll see what I can do about helping you better understand those guys as well, because we do a lot of work to understand those guys.
To add to that, in our shop, in our track, we see more money spent on track day cars than on race cars. Quite a bit.
That's awesome information. Send that to me. And let me put that plug in too. I am an information guy. That's what I do. Contact me for information. Send me information. If you see anything that doesn't jive in what I'm doing, let me know. If there's things missing, let me know, because otherwise I can't improve.
This is one of the joys of RTBC also is all the contact information for everybody is here. So use that information, and 2 weeks from now you may have something that pops up that would fit with the information that Gavin needs. Please get it to him. Question over here.
How and where do we get this report at the end of the year?
I got a slide for that. So all of the stuff I do is available on our website, SEMA.org. Basically, everything I do is free to members. There's typically a nominal charge for non-members. If you're here and you're a non-member and you want to get this, contact me directly. I'll help you out. A non-SEMA member.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to the research. I saw your presentation out at SEMA, not this past year, but the year before, when you talked about doing this research. And, it seems like information we really should know, but we're all so busy doing what we're doing, we never seem to do the count. We know how many cars are showing up at our back gate, but how big the industry is really is information that's very important with all aspects of the business. So thank you very much for that. I invite you to take a seat up on stage, and I also want to welcome up Mr. Joe Spiricino, the head of BB&T Capital Markets Automotive Aftermarket Investment Banking Group. That is quite a mouthful to get out, but they have handled some of the biggest mergers and acquisitions. And as you may or may not know, the industry is sort of going through a big change here over the past decade with a lot of these legacy companies in the business that are sort of the original SEMA members. One in particular that I'm familiar with brags about his SEMA booth number being 7, which he's proud of. But a lot of these legacy companies are, selling out and merging with other companies, and Joe is has been very involved in that. Joe, what is it that private equity is looking for in a company? What are they looking at the same sort of measures of return on investment that you see in other industries, or how is motorsports different?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Private equity is a good place to start when you're talking M&A. They're becoming more and more ubiquitous across all sectors with each passing year. So as it regards this industry, where we've seen the most activity, the most interest from private equity is in a lot of the branded parts suppliers that are part of what Gavin covers so closely. So some of the deals we've done are Holley, which I'm sure everyone knows. We sold MSD into Holley, Driven Performance Brands, which is B&M, Flowmaster, Hearst, Dynan, Autometer, SET, and Cobb. So we've had a good number of deals in the space. What the private equity guys love about this space is the enthusiast aspect. Essentially your customers at the racetrack, as well as the guys running the cars around the track. So as you talk about the racing versus street car split, to the parts guys, it doesn't matter. They're all enthusiasts. They're all guys that and women that wake up, live, eat, breathe this sector. So for private equity, that equates to stability. So, stability, potentially growth. It equates to continuing cash flow. That's what private equity likes. So when private equity looks at a deal, they're looking for steadiness of cash flows and growth. So two aspects that we always entail when we're giving advice and how we try to position companies around risk and growth. So the lower the risk and the higher the growth, the higher the value. Everyone talks multiples. Won't go down that path just yet, but those are the two key factors. So, in terms of what they're underwriting, private equity is typically underwriting something in the 20 to 30% range, depending on the risk of the asset. We also cover the core automotive aftermarket. Those assets are typically underwritten more in the high teens because they're perceived to be lower risk. You run a car, need brakes, need tires, need service, all that sort of stuff. So just for high-level metrics, that's it. And these are levered returns, so they are putting a hefty chunk of debt, typically whatever the company they feel will bear on the business to generate those returns. So not incumbent upon you guys to generate earnings growth of that much, but that's how high-level the math works.
And let me add something a little different from my standpoint. One of the areas that we get the most questions from, and we get a lot of questions from the investment bankers, the consultants, the M&A guys, to me, looking for information about the broader industry, but we answer a lot of questions about racing specifically. They're looking for information, trying to understand the market, just like everybody else is. So I know there's a lot of interest from that sector in this market.
How is the health of motorsports right now from a banker's view?
So the health of the motorsport side, the racetrack business side of it, I'd say is fair. I think there's probably headwinds you all deal with every day in terms of attendees, in terms of kind of how many are coming to the track versus watching it on television. So having hard fixed assets like a track may have a different investor sentiment than somebody like, I don't know if everyone's watching the Formula One deal that's going on, which is asset light, which has a massive multiple on it, if you will. dealing more with licensing rights and IP. So the asset intensity of the business, the kind of where you're at in the market plays into it. But overall, I'd say fair. I'd say in certain parts high, in certain parts low, but overall, investors like this space at the right price. So all things relative.
Last year we saw a big scare from the EPA. And we saw our friends from SEMA prove why SEMA membership is worthwhile as they fought that battle for the entire industry on behalf of their members. How was that battle received by the banking industry? It put some big money down on bets on these big companies like Holley that would have been impacted by this. And how is the reaction to the election results?
Both very related questions, as I'm sure everybody could guess. The regulatory aspect affects that risk side of the equation. So it's there. No one's doing a deal without understanding it, but they're underwriting it. So where it plays a factor is on value. The more risk that's perceived, the lower that value is going to be. So to simplify, that's what I'd say. The overall EPA implications on the industry, I think if you step way back, I mean, yes, day to day, you guys have a lot to deal with. If you step way back, it's hard to imagine a scenario where something that so many Americans, so many global citizens are very enthused about and go to and are part of their lives. It's hard to see that go away completely, but Gavin, you and your organization have been closer to the EPA side of it.
Yeah, and it's obviously not my day-to-day focus, but I will tell you that fight is still going on. We're still pushing the RPM Act through Congress. There's quite a few senators, congressmen that are on board supporting it, but obviously in election year, things change. Just know that the push is still on for that. Anything you guys can do to help that, you should be able to go to SEMA.org/RPM and find more information. This is a grassroots campaign. Get your people out there. If you're not familiar with what it is, the EPA came out with a ruling, literally one line in a huge document, that basically said you are not allowed to take a streetcar, take the emissions off of it if you're using it for racing. Obviously, you guys can see the implications of that. So we're fighting it. If you haven't heard about it, you haven't joined, you haven't sent things to your legislators, please do.
If you have a question, let me see a show of hands, and I'll run the microphone over to you so everybody can hear you clearly. And we do have a question over on this side. And when we're asking questions, I just ask that you indulge me to give your name and who you're with, and then your question. And this side of the room, raise your hand if you have a question. I'll get the other microphone out to you. But back here.
I'm John Robbins with the National Short Track Alliance. And a lot of what I'm hearing when you talk about demographics, ticket sales and competitors in the pits, there's a lot of concern about the younger generation not having passion around cars, car culture, all that. Is there anything in your research as far as looking at age groups that can dispel that, or you're seeing any trends about younger people getting involved?
Yes. So I don't have a lot specific to racing itself, other than, anecdotally what we're seeing a lot is not necessarily a dislike of racing, but just a shift to different forms of racing that they're looking at. In terms of car culture itself, I can tell you that our research says that younger people are more likely to be into their cars. They're more likely to accessorize and modify their cars than older people are. Same as it's always been. There are statistics out there that say that kids, younger people get licenses later. We also know that cars have become very expensive. It's harder to get into a car now. But when it comes to interest, when it comes to things like modifying, accessorizing performance, young people are still more into it than older people are. That's what my research says.
Question from over here. My name is Sandy Heng. I'm an independent journalist, and I haven't seen great data like this before. Kudos. This is a big project. How does the racing business compare to other industries in multiples when these companies are sold, to maybe compare to real estate or other investment areas? Are we running the same, or are we lower or higher? I know you said fair, but...
Yeah, frankly, when we look at assets, it's important to carve out kind of real estate from operating companies, and that's a big deal for racetrack operators. If you own your racetrack, own the physical land, the real estate dynamic of that should always be valued separately from the operating business. We've seen some deals in the market where there's arbitrage tends to happen when someone misses this. It still happens, which is somewhat crazy. But real estate prices should be higher and valued based on the land, on the lease value. Those are very straightforward, and with yields being so low, I mean, where are you guys going to put your money to get a fair yield? Real estate tends to be lower risk, and therefore you can price that out pretty easily. From the operating side of it, we tend to see these. It's hard to have trying to come up with a comparison. I would put this more in a lower end of what multiples generate, mainly for I guess 2 reasons. And it goes back to kind of this risk and growth concept, which I'll continue to use to simplify. From a risk standpoint, in some of the numbers you saw from Gavin, there's more cyclicality to this. There's more discretionary income involved. So if you compare this to an AutoZone or a O'Reilly, which are other parts of the aftermarket, it's going to be considered more risky. From a growth perspective, it's a lot of the other things that kind of come up in here. It's fair growth. We've seen the industry go from 38 or so in 2007 down to under 30 in the recession and back up now to 39. So it's rebounded. People like that about it, but it's also not an upward curve of growth. So for us, we see kind of multiples in the mid-single digits when we're talking operating companies, and typically it's for those reasons that I mentioned.
David Bodden, Thunderhill Raceway. Could you give us some insight into the transition of F1 to the Colorado group and what F1 might look like, and perhaps even why and what the American entity visualizes for Formula One and its role in our sport?
Yeah, it's a great question, and honestly, I don't have a tremendous amount of insight on that in terms of exactly what they're after coming over here. I think they see a massive global audience and the ability to continue extending rights globally on the F1 name. Again, these are all kind of rights and intangible assets that are easily transportable. F1 carries much more over the globe than NASCAR. What they're going to do in the U.S., I honestly don't have a good answer for you on that. I'm not that deep into it.
Great question, and I'm just amazed you're awake after another wonderful 25 hours of Thunderhill. Great job. Back here.
Hi, Chris White from Summit Point Motorsports Park. Going back to an earlier question about getting youth involved in the sport and your market research, did you look at drifting? Because we just had a drift event, local grassroots event. It was one of the larger ones of the year. I mean, it was December, and I had over 140 cars come out, and the split was probably 80 to 90 dedicated drift cars, local grassroots stuff, versus the rest being street cars. So did you factor drifting into your dedicated race cars?
Yeah, we did. So while what I showed in that slide was kind of compacted, with sort of an other there, the intent was really to go through the entire range of racing, including things like drifting, which are a little bit newer, maybe, emerging, but it's definitely in there, and there will actually be a whole section in the report on that.
question for you on this, your research. We think of the big boys, they spend a lot of money, but the grassroots seems to really be the number of cars. Are we going to get a takeaway on this as to what level of part that companies will need to be producing in order to be more profitable? And also for the track owners and promoters, what type of events that they need to make sure that they cater to feed that huge number of cars that is there?
So in terms of this research, we're looking at this as a baseline, right? So we looked around and there wasn't much out there. So we said, what's the starting point? What's the base unit we have to get to? And that is, how many cars are out there and what do they look like in terms of, you know, the type of racing, the type of vehicles that are out there. So that's where we are. This is sort of this is our first cut. As we go forward, we'll be able to use that and expand on it in some other areas. So, you know, for my guys that are making parts, they'll be able to look at this and go, okay, these are the sectors that I play in. Now I know what the size of that is, what my potential opportunity is. For you guys, you'll be able to look at it and go, okay, here's where I play. Here's the type of racing I'm doing now. But there's these other things, and maybe they're a lot bigger than I thought they were. Maybe I should be looking at whether I can incorporate things like that, like the drift events, into what you're doing now.
Yeah, I saw an interesting piece of data or research as part of a presentation coming into this that was suggesting that the younger generation is migrating more towards the motocross kind of side of this world, where the demographic is skewing younger in that direction, as well as more diverse across more ethnic backgrounds. So I think that's probably top of mind for this audience, is does the general circuit track NASCAR type or drag race start losing audience to that world? And I'd be curious, as I talk to folks throughout the day here, if that's what you're seeing or experiencing as well. But I mean, in terms of demographic, that's something that I've come across recently that tends to resonate. That 15 to 34-year-old core demographic that advertisers are after are going more to that side of this market.
Michael Culver with Skip Barber. In terms of the younger audience, I was surprised about a year ago by a survey done by MTV, which, if I can find it, I'll send it to you. But it really debunked the whole theory that young people are not interested in cars. Totally debunked it, so it was very encouraging. On a personal note, I have a 10-year-old son, and he and his friends have tracks at cars, and they run them, compete with them. And they're forever buying parts, I know, because I go to the hobby store all the time. And really, really interested in automotive.
I think the competing forces on it are really interesting, and I fully believe that. I think the younger generation is going to step up and do work on cars. I think you've got, when I say competing dynamics, you've got newer vehicles that you just can't get under the hood and work on. It's really tough. But at the same token, you've got how prevalent YouTube has become in making us all a little bit better mechanics. So we can do a little bit more DIY, even though the car makers are making it impossible to do. So there is a bit of that competing dynamic, and I don't know if they're buying. So I was looking at a YouTube thing the other day for a kid named Chris Fix, and he's probably a young adult. Doesn't show his face, but has over 1 million subscribers that watch him fix cars. Buy them through direct auction sites, and he's looking for kind of a vintage, certain vehicle to go out and fix up. And I do think the younger generation is going to be attracted to that. I think it's one more toy to play with.
Yeah, my son learns everything on YouTube.
Yeah.
Sure.
And to follow up on that, say 4 or 5 years ago, there seemed to be this big media blitz that said kids don't like cars. Kids don't like cars. All they care about is their phone. The MTV study was one. There's several others that I can tell you over the last couple of years, all the follow-up research that's come out has said, no, that's not true. People still like cars. They still want to be mobile. So I agree. I saw the same study.
Joe, were you a racing fan or a big car guy before you started dealing with this industry, or did we just infect you with this after the fact?
I was infected after the fact. So I grew up in a trucking household, so it was more of my enthusiasm was a bit more on that side of the world, and did some work in OE side and made my way over to the aftermarket eventually. So, but it does infect you. It's what you guys get to do day in, day out is a lot of fun, and I'm glad to be a part of it in a small way.
Hi, thanks. Dan Erickson from Atessa in Arizona. I guess it's kind of comments or questions for Gavin, but in your study that you did at the 195,000 folks, I guess I'm sitting here thinking the group that you excluded was the track guys that come out on the weekends and that kind of stuff, which I think is probably the majority of what would affect us. Are you going to include any of that information in the study as far as breakdown? I know it's not your thing necessarily to do that for SEMA, but for us, I think that information would be very valuable. If not a total number per se, just like what you did on the business side of it, folks that felt like it was the same, better, or less, I think would be very important for us to kind of see which way the market is going as well. Is that something we can get you to add?
Yeah, and we're sort of down the road with this. As I said before, our biggest missing link was the dedicated race cars at this point. But also, we look at this as our baseline. So there was nothing out there. We picked a spot that we thought we could get to reasonably right now. And then going forward, we'll be looking at where we can add to that. That crossover of people using their street cars on the track is also a big interest to my dedicated part of the industry. So that's absolutely something we'll be looking at going forward. The more people are doing that, the more likely they are to buy from my guys, right? So it's definitely something we're going to want to get more information about.
Gavin, us in the industry, how can we help you convince the folks at SEMA that this needs to be regular research that's done? Because trends are always changing. Jim mentioned the drifting that has just gone crazy. We think of just Formula Drift and the ones we see on TV, but every racetrack that's got an open parking lot can host drifting events or autocross, and all of these events are really, these grassroots events are the growth. How can we as an industry help communicate with the right people at SEMA to say there is a real need for this research?
And I would say grassroots there also. You know what? Being here at the PRI show, talk to the people from SEMA or with the PRI badges. Let them know that this is of interest. Let them know, hey, I heard you guys doing this. What's next? We love this. PRI and SEMA are fully integrated. We're one unit. So we're working to help this show. We're working to help the people at this show, and that includes all of you guys. So just think of it in those terms. We're here to help you, but we also need your feedback to know what it is we can do to help you. So you can contact me, you can contact other people with the SEMA or PRI staff. Let us know.
Perhaps
Write down. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Real quick, too, while you're there, Jeremy Porter, Atlanta Motorsports Park. About 80% of the road course market is production cars. It's 20% is race cars. So that research would be fantastic.
Awesome.
I think as a place to start, just obviously I'm new and don't know anything, but we've got quite the group of folks here that probably track a lot of that information already. You mentioned that you've got a company that you hired that contacts people on a regular basis. If nothing else, we can start with telling you same, less, or more. I think over time, as long as we develop a plan versus just, hey, we'll talk to you, we'll get you some stuff. If we can get a consistent group of people here to supply you with that information, it would probably be a good place to start for all of us.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm up here and I'm learning from you guys, right? So this may be an opportunity for us. As I said, we currently do a survey of retailers within the racing industry. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to look at doing a survey of tracks in the racing industry. So if we can get buy-in from the people who are running tracks around the country to support this, then we can take that information, we can aggregate it, we can put it out for the benefit of everybody. And I'm willing to try to push that through if I think the industry is willing to help us out and answer these questions for us. What do you guys think? Is that something that you guys would be willing to do? Something your owners and managers are going to sign off on? All right, cool. Then I will put that in our queue and try to push it through going forward.
And now to the man over here who gave me my best nickname that anyone has ever given me. John.
Dr. Demento. For those of you who know Dr. Demento, I mean, that voice, close your eyes, that is Dr. Demento. Put a top hat on there. It's midnight on a Sunday night, you're listening to Dennis or Dr. D, you don't know. So. But John Warniak with SEMA, and to follow up on your question and actually your comment about Monster Energy Supercross and the MTV study. Kids, basically millennials, 1980 to 2000, born in that demographic, they are less interested in traditional cars. They are highly interested in new cars. This is the first generation of Formula E, Robo-Race. And we'll be talking about this at the session at 1:30. And if you look at what Formula E is doing, they're having teaming up 20 racers from Formula E with 10 e-gamers at the Consumer Electronics Show. The winner gets $1 million. That's how you get to the millennials. That's how you get fans. And Monster Energy Supercross, if you look at what's happened there, and we talked about this last year with the session with Ralph Shaheen. If you look at it, and that's what we're going to focus on at 1:30, is motorsports, particularly traditional motorsports, needs to take more risks, particularly with media technology and the gamers, as I mentioned, some of the other things. Jim Loud does a great job with Formula Drift. Red Bull Global Rallycross does a good job of that. We need to see more of that. Now with NASCAR 2.0 with Monster, we'll see if they do it. But to that point about, I think that's your research, Gavin. How do you get those millennials engaged in new or next generation motorsports?
Final question, back here.
First of all, thanks for taking the time to do this research. I know it's a lot of work and it's greatly appreciated. My name is James. I'm founder of Kart Pulse, which is a media and growth engine for the sport of kart racing. Wondering if you guys had resources to look into that segment at all in regards to karting in the U.S. at all?
Again, we haven't at this point. Specifically, we had to kind of draw some lines in the sand and say, this is where we could get to that was sort of the maximum benefit for our guys. Again, as we go forward, we'll be looking at how we expand this. Part of that will be looking at, the PRI show. What kind of representation are these different things at the show? Because that's a big feedback for us, right? And so if we're seeing a ton of karting, then that becomes, more of a priority of an area that we can focus on.
Additionally, I'd just like to say, anybody on the floor here, if you have karting involved in your mix in some way or you're interested in it, come look me up and we can chat. Thank you.
Yeah, real quickly, and I know we're kind of wrapping up. This session is really, really important. Probably all the other ones are going to be really intellectual, but what's really key to this is we now have SEMA resources that have said this is something we're looking at from PRI basis. We all have an incredible vested interest in it. For it, we said, hey, and so what Gavin's done is Gavin's kind of put the stake in the sand, and he says, here's what it is, but all of a sudden we've created all these questions, we've got this interest, and we do it. We can feed this data back to our insights, what's practical for us, back to Gavin. He can process it because that's what he does. It's stuff that I've been interested in it, but he can actually deliver it for it. But the other part of the equation is we have Joe here. And it's one thing to all talk amongst ourselves that we do. But the trouble is, how do you get it out of the room and what's there? And then Joe understands it from the business perspective, which is finance, which is then going to allow the story to be told about how we bring additional capital into this thing, why people stay in this business, why people exit in this business, and it's there. And what Joe is doing is he's being able to look at our industry, not from a passion standpoint, which we all do, but look at it from a numerical and analytical standpoint that the rest of the world needs to know. So we're going to be following up with these guys, and I can't thank you enough for really going through and doing, especially for Gavin. It's hard anytime you do the first thing of this. Everybody says, I want more, I want more. But the trouble is somebody's got to go through and do it. And if you guys go look in your back of your book in here under tab 7, we actually did infographics on the National Speedway Directory listing of tracks and stuff like that. And again, it's a way to present numbers, tell the story for this. So anyways, there's more to come for this, and it's fantastic, and I'm really honored to have you guys here to use the platform. So Dennis, wrap it up, because sorry for taking time.
No, it's perfect, cherry on the top of that sundae. We did learn an awful lot from this group, and one of the things that I'm going to be doing throughout the day is, as I take notes, I'm going to share the 3 takeaways with you. And then at the end of the show, after we all get recovered from PRI, I'll be sending those takeaways to Tim, so we have a concrete, record of some of the fun things that we talked about. Get the conversation started here at RTBC and continue it throughout the year. And that's why I do encourage you to interact with Gavin and Joe, and make sure that if you have a question throughout the year, don't wait until the 6th annual RTBC to ask these guys. Ask them throughout the year. So what did I learn? I learned that thanks to SEMA's research, we're finding out that the business is recovering nicely. Thank God and SEMA for that. Also learned that, how big is this market? Well, we're not really sure. So it is very important to encourage SEMA to have Gavin's group continue to do the research. But 200,000 active cars is probably just a good guess and a good starting point. And that doesn't include the folks involved in autocross and drifting events and other things. And number 3, private equity loves us because we do give them some level of stability. Why? Because we're a bunch of knuckleheads that continue to spend money that we don't have. But that's my takeaway from the session. I want to give these folks a round of applause for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.